Hi, this is John Anthony and welcome to the Sports Tippers podcast of the AFL Finals Preview. Quick rundown of the final standings of the ladder. We saw Adelaide take the minor premiership. Geelong came in second spot. Richmond came in third, surprisingly. Fourth place went to GWS. Port Adelaide booked a home final by finishing fifth. Likewise did Sydney, who came in sixth after their 0-6 start, the first team to ever make the finals after that start. Seventh spot went to Essendon, and West Coast slipped into the eighth spot after defeating Adelaide in the final round to relegate Melbourne to ninth. So the first game is on Thursday night. It's the first place Adelaide against the fourth place GWS. Crownbet's got the current odds at Adelaide at $1.50 and GWS at $2.65. This team only met once this season, and that was back in round one. And Adelaide absolutely destroyed GWS. They won 147-91. In that game, the Giants led by 14 points at quarter time before the Crows went into overdrive. They booted 20 goals to 10 and ran away with the season opener. Rory Laird was the one who had the big game for Adelaide. He had 40 possessions, and Eddie Betts had 4 goals as well for Adelaide. Injury-wise, Rory Sloane had his appendix out. He's probably touch and go whether he's going to play, but we do expect him to play. Taylor Walker and Talia are also under a bit of an injury cloud, but again, you fully expect them to play with it being a final. GWS, they seem to be relatively injury-free, and probably the only question is if Steve Johnson's going to get a game in his final season. So what's online? So the home preliminary finals up for grabs. Well, it's Adelaide. They've struggled. They've lost their last 2 games against Sydney and West Coast. But likewise with GWS, they have not been playing well either. They slipped to fourth on the ladder after they got smashed by Geelong by 44 points in round 23. But with the week off in between the finals, it's given both sides the opportunity to fine-tune their preparation heading into this huge game on Thursday night. So, what are we going to watch for? So, Adelaide, they're obviously the number one scoring team in the competition, but they start very slowly. They'll obviously, being at home, they'll be keen to burst out of the blocks and ensure that the 50,000 strong crowd gets into the game early and they try and shut GWS out completely. Adelaide's key defender, Kyle Hartigan, he should get the first crack at Jonathan Patton, the GWS big guy. Hartigan had a really good game against West Coast spearhead Kennedy last week, and he kept him to 1 goal, surprisingly. The Crows rarely use a tagger, but Riley Knight's been effective in that role when he's been given the opportunity this year. He might need it if the GWS midfielders get away early. Guys like Shield, Cornelio, even Toby Green if they move him around. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there. In the ruckman, Mumford needs to have a big game for GWS. Jacobs is pretty known as one of the best, if not the best, ruckman in the comp. So Mumford needs to at least break even to give GWS a chance. The Giants may look at putting a tagger on Laird after Brady Smith after the game, especially what Laird had in the first game, getting 40 possessions. Both those guys lead them out of attack and set up the majority of their scoring opportunities. So maybe like a Matt DeBoer if he gets the nod, but if they put Johnson in over DeBoer, not quite sure what they're going to do there. And Zach Williams, likewise to Laird, he's the catalyst from the back line for GWS. He provides plenty of attack across the back line, but he might get the defensive role on shutting down Betts. Some of the other keys are Adelaide with their huge forward line. Guys like Lynch, Jenkins, Walker, and then obviously with Betts, Crummy. The GWS don't have a lot of tall backs except for Phil Davis. So, maybe even a Heath Shaw might get a job on Betts. So it's going to be interesting to see how the matchups go. Crows have had the clear advantage in their last 8 games with the 7-1 record. But obviously, when GWS were just coming through, that's when most of those big beatdowns were happening. So you can't really take a lot of that into consideration. Crows, as we know, they're tough to beat at Adelaide. They've won 9 of their 12 games there this year. The Giants on the road, though, going into state, have won 4, lost 5, and only drew 1. So you'd say that Adelaide gets the nod there. When it comes to the finals experience, the edge goes with the Giants. They've got a combined 135 games compared to only 130 for the Crows. Adelaide's actually attempting to win its first qualifying final since 2006. That was back when it was Sydney, West Coast and Adelaide were definitely the most dominant teams. Crows midfielder Matt Crouch, he's rocketed up the AFL player ratings this season. He was named All-Australian last week, and actually had the second most possessions in the league behind Tom Mitchell from Hawthorn. So look for him to have a big game. But him and his brother are also really good defensively at tackling and can shut down players if need be. The player it's a big week for is Jeremy Cameron, the GWS forward. He's had a very up and down season. He did kick 3 goals against Geelong in round 23, but he's been down with a hamstring injury and been in and out of the side, and they need him to have a big game. In the qualifying final this time last year against Sydney, he had a big game for GWS, so see if he can repeat that. In the AFL exotics for the fantasy points, markets aren't posted yet, but we will be doing a preview closer to the game on Wednesday or Thursday when the teams are through and we know with injuries for sure. But we'll be looking at players like, especially the Crouch brothers, Matt and Brad Crouch. They're usually around the 100 to 105 point mark, so we'd be looking for both of them to go over, especially if Sloan doesn't play, but we do expect him to play. For GWS, guys like Cornelio, even though he's been down, he should have a big game. Shield will have a big game. They probably, a lot of the time, the midfields do rub each other out, so it's going to be tough. You'd probably be looking for a guy like Lynch or Jenkins or even Walker to have a big game in the forwards for GWS, and maybe a Toby Green for GWS to have a big game. So obviously once the markets come out on the Thursday, we can go from there. But our tip in the game is we think Adelaide by probably 2 to 3 goals, and obviously Adelaide 1-39 probably looks like the safe bet. So that takes care of the that's pretty much the preview for the game 1. So game 2's on Friday night. It's at 7:50 at the MCG. It's the second place Geelong hosting the third place Richmond. So the interesting thing in this is, of course, that Geelong were entitled to having a home final at Simonds Stadium, where things would have been a lot different outcome-wise, you would assume. But obviously, with the big crowd potentially there, they've moved it to the MCG, where, as we know, Richmond's home ground is. So things could swing in Richmond's favour. So Geelong finished second, and Richmond, surprisingly, I think I had them at about 10th or 11th. They've ended up finishing third. So CrownBet have the current odds at Geelong at $1.75 and Richmond at $2.10. Last time they met, it wasn't that long ago. It was only round 21, and it was at Simonds Stadium. And Geelong got the win 80-66, and this was an understrength Geelong, so they did really well. Injury-wise, at the moment, Richmond seem to be travelling pretty well. Geelong have Joel Selwood, who we still don't know. He said he wants to play. Gut feeling says he will, but they're playing cat and mouse, and whether he says he will, then they say they won't risk him, so we'll just have to wait until game time. But some of the big things in this game are obviously being with it at the MCG. Richmond have turned into a similar team to Sydney from years past, where they basically slow the game down and try and grind it out. Geelong, on the other hand, if Dangerfield can have a big game, that definitely puts them in better stead. And if they can get Hawkins, I assume Rance will go to Hawkins, then you would hope that Hawkins can have a big game. The Richmond forwards, this is the incredible thing. They don't. Rewalt still has the big name value, but with him being there, taking the main defender, there's a lot of the lesser guys. Martin goes up forward. As you know, he'll win the Brownlow. He'll kick goals, but they've got a lot of little guys, no-name guys who pop up, like Castagna, and a lot of their midfielders kick goals too. This is a pretty tough one to call. I just have a bit of a feeling that Richmond might pinch this unless Dangerfield goes absolutely crazy, and he did what he did against Hawthorn, where they just dump him in the forward line and he kicks 6 or 7. But likewise, Martin could do the same. I have a feeling that Richmond could sneak away with this by probably a goal or two. But obviously, the lower scoring it is, the more chance that I give Richmond. Just have a feeling there's kind of a bit of the Bulldogs last year in them, where if they win this, obviously, then they get the home prelim final at the MCG. And obviously, if they make the grand final, they don't have to leave the MCG. So that's the concern for Geelong. And Geelong must be upset that they don't get their home final. But obviously, with money and everything involved, that's the thing that's going to come down to at the end of the day. So in this game, we will lean towards Richmond. But in the fantasy also, Martin and Dangerfield, obviously, they'll be probably solid. Martin will probably be around the 120 points. Dangerfield could be around 130, depending. 130 is a lot, but obviously we know what Dangerfield can do. Probably look for guys in the fantasy like Menagola's been playing really well. He gets a lot of tackles. He's usually around the 100. For Richmond, we'd probably guys like Brandon Ellis has been playing well, or Sean Grigg. They're guys who can pop up and do quite well in fantasy. The other guys for Geelong, probably like a guy like a Mackie. He accumulates the disposals, and Mitch Duncan plays really well for them as well. So the third game's on Saturday afternoon at 4:20 at the SCG. It's the 6th place Sydney taking on the 7th place Essendon. The CrownBet have the odds at Sydney at $1.20 and Essendon at $4.75. We all know what Sydney did. After starting the season 0-6, they only lost 2 games for the remainder of the season, and they were both against Hawthorn, so thank goodness Hawthorn's not in the finals. Essendon had a good season as well. They finished 12-10, and they were a bit up and down, but they did have some good wins during the season and deserved to be in 7th spot. Last time they met was it was a brilliant game. If anyone remembers, Sydney won 86-85, and Gary Rowan kicked a goal from right on the goal line after the final siren to beat Essendon. From memory, I think Essendon was up by about 3 goals with about 2 minutes to go, and somehow went down. It's going to be interesting to see if they can put up the same kind of a fight. Injury-wise for the Swans, got Hanbury and Papley. Fully expect both to play. They're kind of fighting the clock a bit, but you expect them to play. And for Essendon, Green looks like he's not going to be playing. So look for Tipawudi to go into the forward line and continue there, taking over Green's spot. Key matchups, Lance Franklin's on fire, obviously. We saw what he did when he kicked 10 goals. He won the Coleman medal as well. So they're starting to gel really well, Swans. It's been a bit up and down, but like with Kennedy playing well, if Papley gets back in the forward line, they've got Reid, they've got Tippett. If Tippett actually finally does something, they've got a lot of weapons and they're smart, so they should have no trouble with Essendon. I mean, with Essendon, their forward line's not too bad. If Danaher, with the height they've got with Hooker and Danaher, if they can do something, then it can make things interesting. But the Sydney, it's a juggernaut at the moment, and you expect Sydney to have a pretty comfortable win by, probably anywhere from, say, 4 goals onwards. But don't be surprised if weather or something or Essendon they're going to have to try and shut it down. So, but if Sydney gets the head start, it's pretty much going to be over, we think. So the last game is on Sunday. From the Adelaide Oval also, it's 5th place Port Adelaide taking on 8th place West Coast. So CrownBet have got the odds at Port Adelaide at $1.48 and Gold Coast at $2.70. Last time they played, West Coast actually got the job done in Adelaide. They won 97-87. Both teams are so up and down and so unpredictable. Port Adelaide obviously at home play a lot better, but with Port Adelaide they pretty much beat no one all season except for the teams below them, and beat up on the average teams, and had a lot of trouble against the good teams. West Coast, pretty much the same. West Coast are absolutely horrible on the road. We saw some of the monumental collapses they had during the season. One comes to mind against Collingwood in the last few rounds when they were up by about, I think it was about mid-20s in the last quarter and somehow got rolled. But I mean, they had a good win last week. It was an understrength Adelaide who had a few players out, but I mean, they still got the job done. So, the key matchups, obviously Kennedy for West Coast. If he can, he's probably going to have to kick 5 around that mark for them to be competitive and have a real chance. The Port Adelaide forward line, if the Wingard's been playing in the midfield, but if they get him in the forward line, Robbie Gray's starting to finally get something going. They're very, very similar teams, but you'd obviously have to give the nod to Port Adelaide being at home. I have a feeling West Coast are going to be a bit of a show in this. It's another game where you'd probably take Port Adelaide definitely in the 1-39 margin, but maybe a goal or two. But this is something where you can see, unfortunately for Port Adelaide supporters, Port Adelaide falling over and West Coast at a juicy $2.70, really sticking it to them and giving it a good chance. In the fantasy points, The usual guys who we select in these games are Ollie Wines for Port Adelaide, and Brad Ebert. Travis Boak's actually another guy who's been coming good lately. He's playing more in their plans and of moving the ball. He's covered it the last few times, the points margin, so he's one that we'll be definitely looking at, especially and with Wingard as well. For West Coast, Mitchell used to be a really good option, but obviously if they lose, it's his last game. He doesn't get the ball as much anymore, and likewise with Pritis, who if they lose, his career's finished. So guys like Gaff, Shuey, Kennedy is a good option if he gets going. McGovern's another guy who, depending on what the points over under are, he's another guy who gets a lot of marks, gets a lot of intercept marks in the back line for them. So yeah, like it's another one that's a lot closer than what the odds would suggest at $2.70 for West Coast and $1.48 for Port. Port obviously at home, you can't go against them at home and the way West Coast travel, but I have a feeling this is going to be a lot closer than what people think. So a quick rundown. So we've tipped Adelaide by about 2 goals in the first game. The second game, I have a feeling Richmond supporters, if there's any out there, that they could do something in this game, especially with Selwood out. It's going to come down to Dangerfield. Even if Richmond, I don't know whether they'll tag him, but obviously if they do, it'll take him out of the game hopefully, and might even be able to. They'll probably end up dumping Dangerfield in the forward line to see if he can go crazy. Sydney should have a comfortable win against Essendon, probably by about the 4-goal plus margin. And in the last game, Port Adelaide, we will select them, but confidence-wise, it's really, really tough to pick either team, even though Port Adelaide finished a lot higher on the ladder in 5th place compared to West Coast in 8th. So we will be doing another podcast on... it'll be Wednesday night, Thursday, when the final teams are announced. So obviously we know what we're dealing with, and we'll give our selections for the fantasy points and the exotic margin that we do as well. It will do like a 1 to 39 or 40 plus margin and stuff. So, okay, guys. So, good luck, and thank goodness the AFL finals are starting, because the rugby league's been a bit of a struggle. But we'll be back shortly to give you the rundown. Thank you.